and applying replacement effects correctly. So just have three goals, basically. Simple as that. So mostly this presentation is aimed at new L1s, especially who those who are looking to expand their knowledge within this topic. But this presentation is also aimed at existing judges who just wants to get the rust out of the way. Just how many years it has already been since we last time judged. So I guess some of you might not know me. So since this is my first time presenting a conference internationally via digital platform. So before we start, I'd like to introduce myself. So my name is Philip Peña. I'm a level 2 from the Philippines. You may call me Phil for short. So I've been judging since 2006 when Time Spiral came out. I am not officially certified. I'm just volunteering for events, but got officially certified in 2011 during nationals. I believe that's the last old format nationals that was held, and I got certified for it. So unlucky for me that I wasn't able to judge any nationals. So I've been certified for level 2 in 2012 as preparations for GP Singapore 2013 and pretty much stayed there. So I'm just pretty much active as level 2, trying to help out the community and such. Okay, so if you have any questions regarding the topic, please collate all of your questions first so we don't try to get lost along the way. Try to collate all those questions first, and we'll get back to them when we still have time later, okay? So just a little bit of sound check if anyone could hear me well or no. Okay, sound all good. Thank you. So, what are replacement effects? Replacement effects are a kind of continuous effect as mentioned on Rule 611. Rule 611 is basically continuous effects, if you can look that up. But we won't tackle the entirety of 611 here. So the way to put it is, it's an effect that particularly watches over an event that will happen or in partial or completely replace that event with a different event that is dictated by that replacement effect. So for example, if an effect would happen and there's an applicable replacement effect that would otherwise change that effect to the one mentioned by the replacement effect, you do that effect instead of what intentionally was. So the keywords are instead, skip, as or this card name permanent enters the battlefield, as this permanent or card name is turned face up, and regenerate. Let's just go back a bit to that regenerate part because even though there's no wording for regeneration effects that it's indicated that it's a replacement effect, it is also still kind of a replacement effect. So there are also some kind of effects that redirect damage. Those are also replacement effects. Am I going too fast or no? Okay. So just be reminded about these keywords. If you see these keywords within the card text effect, there are all replacement effects. Or if the effect otherwise state that it will try to redirect damage or has a wording of regenerate, that's also kind of a replacement effect. So replacement effects can only replace an event once. Please take note about this. By their own effect. It's like a buff that can only be used one time, then it's gone. So one particular replacement effect cannot invoke itself repeatedly. There's no going infinite with just one replacement effect and get stuck there. So you use the effect once, and then it gets used up for that duration. So I suppose the better way to explain this is with a flowchart. So let's try to see how this goes using a flowchart. Pardon the awful structure of the word, the flowchart. Okay, so let's try to explain what the flowchart do. So we first start with the upper left part, which reads event start. So this is basically your effect. Um, for example, draw a card. A very simple effect. So this is the current event that is waiting to resolve. So below it, below the down arrow would be the replacement effect that would be waiting for some particular event to happen or the effect to happen. So this replacement effect will ask the original effect, would this replacement effect replace the ongoing event? If yes, then replace whatever part of the replacement effect is applicable. And that becomes your new event. Then that effect will ask again, are there any more replacement effects? So if yes, you replace it again, and that becomes your new event again. The old one will no longer be there. And will it try to ask again, are there any more replacement effects to affect this event? Then if no, the current event will continue and it will resolve as the new event. So are we clear with the flowchart? It's just very simple. So let's give a hypothetical example here. So you have an effect that tells you to draw a card. Then there are permanents you control. One that reads as, if you would draw a card, mill a card instead. And another one that reads, if a card would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So looking at the flowchart, since you would draw a card, there's a replacement effect that instead, if you would draw a card, that you will mill a card instead. So you will try to mill a card. But instead of milling the card, that card ends up in exile because the applicable replacement effect that would otherwise put the card into the graveyard will affect that card with the other replacement effect. So we try to apply as much replacement effects as we could. Okay, so are we clear with that? Okay, so let's move on. One important thing to know is that replacement effects must exist first before any appropriate event occurs. This normally comes in usually as a response to a spell being cast or an ability being put on the stack. But replacement effects can't go back in time to see if there are any actions that can be replaced. So it is important that they must exist first before these replacement effects can affect anything. So there's no an ongoing effect that currently resolved, then later you would set up a replacement effect. No, it won't affect the previous event. It must be present at all times for it to affect anything. And if an event is replaced, the original event never happens. So instead, you get the new modified event. Another important thing to know is if the new modified event occurs, some triggered abilities may trigger. For instance, if you have an effect that reads deal damage, but you have a replacement effect that reads if a source you control would deal damage, draw that many cards instead. and you have a permanent that triggers upon drawing cards. So after you apply all the relevant replacement effects, the one trigger effect that you cannot trigger before suddenly triggers now, because that replacement effects make it happen. And if an effect, that replacement effect would replace an event, but that event never happens because perhaps because a continuous effect is preventing that effect from happening, like can't effects, then the replacement effect simply doesn't do anything at all. It won't try until it has something to replace. So it will just stay there until it's used up. Okay, so anyone having issues so far or no? Everyone can still follow, or I'm being too fast? Okay, so let's continue. So there's a type of replacement effect which is called self-replacement effects. Um, a lot of people are getting confused by this. So let's try to tackle this part. Okay. So they are an effect of a resolving spell or ability that replaces at least a part or all of that spell or ability's own effect. To better understand and identify this, think of it as a line of text within that spell or ability. It has to be a line of text within that spell or ability. It could not come from any other source other than itself. If the conditions are satisfied, you do y instead of x. It isn't a self replacement. It isn't a self replacement effect if that particular line of text is missing in the spell or ability itself. Okay, cards will self replacement effects will always take such. So I will state an example later with this. So let's move on to the next. We have a set of effects that state something cannot happen. These aren't exactly replacement effects, but they do follow a set of rules. Okay. I will repeat. These are not replacement effects, but they follow certain rules. First, can't effects must exist before appropriate event occurs. Like replacement effects, they can't go back in time and change something that's already happened. So this is 614.17a. Okay. Second, if an event can happen, a player can choose to pay a cost that includes in that event. Let's say if an effect lets you pay mana to draw a card whenever a card goes to the graveyard, but nothing goes to the graveyard perhaps because an effect lets cards go into exile instead of hitting the graveyard, then you don't get that option to pay for any of those effects. Third, if an event can happen, it can only be replaced by a self-replacement effect. If it isn't a self-replacement effect, then no other replacement and or prevention effects can modify or replace it. Okay, so I've been trying to research this part. For now, I can't seem to find an appropriate example for this comprehensive rules entry. So if you guys got any good card examples for this, please do let me know. I suppose right now maybe it is good or later. But for now, I guess we'll stick with the hypothetical idea. There's just one card that I was able to get, but there are no applicable other card effects that, let's say, fit the bill. Okay. So let's see how it goes from here. So let's say you have an effect that reads, I'll type it in the chat now. A creature that cannot be damaged. It reads can't be damaged. And you have another effect that reads this card deals 2 damage to target creature. If you control a black permanent, destroy that creature instead. So looking at the window right now, what card was that again? Joel mentioned it to me. Dark something. Let's see. Anyway, that's the effect of the card. So, oh, never mind about this. While the card has a self-replacement effect of destroying a creature instead of dealing damage, if you have another card, another effect that reads if a creature is dealt damage. So let's put this line of text here in the chat. You have another effect that reads if a creature is dealt damage, destroy it instead. And perhaps you don't control a black permanent at that time, then the other replacement effect won't happen because of that creature's ability. Thank you. Dark Temper. Yes. So for those unaware, this is Dark Temper. There we go. Can you see the card clearly? I can't seem to find a better example for this card to go with another card to better illustrate 614.17c. But if you can give me a better example of 614.17c, even the ones that I've asked were stumped by this specific rules entry. So it will be great if you can send me a better example for this. But in hindsight, this particular entry, this is how it works. Okay. So lastly, there's 614.17d. It's a not so recent update, but it's a topic that is frequently discussed. So any idea which card best fits the bill for this rule? Anyone can type in the chat. No? So here we go. It's Blood Moon. It's a very, very good example of 614.17d. So how do we explain 614.17d? It's basically saying if a particular permanent would enter the battlefield, so you first check the characteristics of the permanent as it would exist on the battlefield. So think of it as though it's already on the battlefield before you play it, taking into account replacement effects that had already modified how it enters the battlefield. So, for example, the card enters the battlefield tap, which is already a replacement effect. Then continuous effects from that permanent's own static abilities that would apply to it once it's on the battlefield. So another example for this would be Shocklands, which allows you to pay 2 life and to allow it entering the battlefield untapped. And continuous effects that already exist and would apply to the battlefield. So going back to Blood Moon, if you would have a land enter the battlefield tap before, now it would not. So it will just enter the battlefield and tap already, and it's already a mountain at that time. It won't enter the battlefield tap, then become untapped, then it will become a mountain. No. The recent update tells us that it will just enter as it would be the same as it is on the battlefield already. And if a payment is needed for that land to enter the battlefield on tap, now it won't have that option. Okay? So if you could collate the questions now, this is when Alpine Moon came out, right? Yes, it did. It came in with the Ixalan rules update. So it's pretty much the standard right now. This just not applies to Blood Moon. The other better example would be, let's bring up the other. This one. Metallic Mimic was the other best example along with Arcane Adaptation. Let's see, Arcane Adaptation. The rule states that if before the rules update, Metallic Mimic and Arcane Adaptation don't work well. Now they do. So if a creature would enter the battlefield as the creature type you mentioned, it will have those counters now. Before, it doesn't work that way. Okay. So before we move on to the examples of cards with replacement effects, anyone want to ask a question? Yes, Bins. The update on the Metallic Mimic, yes, it will get the counter now, opposed to before that it won't. The idea is because before the update, it would not recognize the creature types that were named for Arcane Adaptation immediately. So now, it will see that whenever the creature enters the battlefield and you get the appropriate creature type correct for both Mimic and Arcane Adaptation, you will see them as though they're already on the battlefield, so they will get the counters. So, any other question? Yes, Joey. Let's indulge you for a while and see what your question is. Let's just not try to have some dead air here. Okay, so for Blood Moon with the shock lands, yes. So let's try to set a little bit of example for a shock land here. So we are all on the... When does it see it as a mountain? When you're going to try to play it. No. In your hand, it's still a hallowed fountain. If you would play it, it will enter the battlefield already as a mountain. So you don't get to pay 2 life. It will enter the battlefield untapped. So does that enter your... Yes, it is replaced while it's entering. You treat it as though it's already on the battlefield. So whatever Blood Moon will turn Hallowed Fountain in, you already consider this ahead of time. Would Blessed Sanctuary prevent Dark Blast? Wait. What is Blessed Sanctuary? Blessed Sanctuaries. Vince, this is the same type of scenario that we're trying to look for. But this does not fit 614.17c because it's a prevention effect. So otherwise, the self-replacement effect would still happen because the player had a black permanent at that time, so it will get replaced. But this does not work the way we intended it to be. So sorry, Vince, that's not the example that we're trying to look for. So are we good before we proceed? Yeah, it's been a hard time to research about it anyway. Okay, so let's move on. Examples of replacement effects. So first, we have this. If you see a card that uses the word instead to replace an event in the card deck, then yes, it is a replacement effect. So if a creature dealt damage by annihilating fire would die on that turn, so instead of the creature going to the graveyard, it will be exiled instead. Pretty much basic. It's just changing the way how the creature would move to another zone. So uses the word skip is another example of a replacement effect. Just to note that skipping a particular pace, step, or turn will have that pace, step, or turn never occur. This also includes that is anything that is scheduled to happen on that pace, step, or turn. So let's see, for example, if you have a triggered ability that triggers at the beginning of the draw step, let's say Howling Mind. So this is the best example for this. Since this one triggers at the beginning of the each player's draw step, and you are skipping your draw step, so this ability never triggers because you're entirely skipping your draw step. Okay. So next, as this enters the battlefield is also replacement effect. So as you can see with the example, clone is the best example for this. And the next would be this kind of land, which has an inherent ability, enters the battlefield tap. So this is also a replacement effect. So this permanent is having this effect will modify how it enters the battlefield. Okay. So next, there are some continuous effects that modify how permanents enter the battlefield, and Blind Norwegians is a very good example for this. For those who are uninitiated by older formats, maybe this will do. Which also works the same thing as Blind Obedience. So this is much more cleaner. Let's get extort out of the way. Okay, so these are certain continuous effects that replaces how permanents enter the battlefield are also types of replacement effects. Okay, next. So as I said earlier, redirection effects are also replacement effects. So just to note about this, redirection means the next X damage that would be dealt to another permanent is instead dealt to another permanent. Just to note, there's a word instead among the line. So that is also a kind of replacement effect. Just a little bit of side note though. If the affected creature or planeswalker perhaps is no longer on the battlefield when the damage would be redirected, the effect does nothing. So let's say you cast Captain's Maneuver on, let's say, Centaur Cursor are very, very good example for this. So you cast Captain's Maneuver on your Centaur's Cursor. That is being blocked by another Centaur Cursor. Then your opponent happens to bounce his own cursor. So Captain's Maneuver won't do anything at this point because it has nothing to redirect. Okay. So next, for certain morph cards, has the words as this permanent is turned face up. It's a little bit different from, let's say, Brine Elemental, which reads when is turned face up, since this is a kind of triggered ability. But for Hooded Hydra, in this case, when you turn it face up, it immediately gets the counters. So your opponent cannot respond to it. It just gets replaced with from 0/0 then it becomes 5, 5. No, it's not like that. It just will just get the 5 plus 5 count, the 5 plus 1 plus 1 counters immediately. Okay. One other example would be, hold on, my chat went down there. So one good example would be aquamorph entity. For those unfamiliar, so when you turn this face up, since it has a characteristic defining ability, so if you turn it face up, it will immediately become a choice of your choice of 5, 1 or 1, 5. It won't be a 0, 0, then become whatever you chose. This just happens immediately because it replaces itself. Okay. So here's an example of replacement effects with that, or that affects how damage would be dealt to the affected player. So as you can see, it also uses the word instead. And of course, our very, very famous double damage, double whatever. If solemnity, yes, that is also a replacement effect, Vince. But as I said earlier, it's a Kent, so it's a kind of not of replacement effects, but it is something that the game is trying to prevent happening. Okay, so let's see how solemnity is worded. Yes, Kent. It's a Kent. So we follow certain rules with this. We'll get to that later, Vince. I'll explain this in detail. Okay. So again, for this example, a very, very famous one, effects that or replacement effects rather, that modify damage and how it will be dealt to players. So the next one. So this is a very good example, a very basic example of a self-replacement effect. So as you can see here, we have Galvanic Blast. So it reads, deals 2 damage to any target, but if you have, or if you rather control 3 or more artifacts, deal 4. So you apply the self-replacement effect as it resolves when the appropriate self-replacement effect is satisfied. In this case, Metalcraft. And another example of a self-replacement effect is Remand. While it does not specifically have a threshold like Galvanic Blast, it has a self-replacement effect that reads basically, if the spell that you countered would be put into its owner's hand, instead of going to the graveyard like rules say, it will go to its owner's hand instead. So this is a kind of self-replacement effect. Again, self-replacement effect should be embedded on the card and not outside its own effects. So, any questions regarding the examples? So, there are no questions. If no, we'll proceed on how to apply self-replacement effects. So, I believe since no one asked the question, I think we're all in agreement that we'll discuss at least the basics of what replacement effects are and the examples of which replacement effects hold on to cards, and the rules governing for some parts of the replacement effects. So now, we try to tackle what we do to apply these replacement effects. Okay. So first, we first apply these replacement effects in this order. It cannot be in any order that you choose. It has to be specifically in this order. Okay. So first, self-replacement effects apply first. Okay. If there are cards that has a self-replacement effect, you apply them first. Then, if you have replacement effects that changes control of a permanent, it would enter the battlefield. You apply them the second one. The second. So the example for this would be the other specimens. I think this is the only card that applies to this rule. But if there are cards that you know that does similar to this, then those are true as well. Okay. So next, you apply replacement effects that mix something up. Yes, crafty cuppers. Yes, they do. As long as it will try to modify the event of making a certain permanent enter the battlefield. Yes, it crafty cuppers fits that bill. Thank you, Enoch. So third, apply replacement effects that would make something enter the battlefield as a copy of something else. So again, we're going back to the example of clone. And lastly, any other replacement effects, your regular replacement effects, you apply them last. Okay, so again, first apply for self-replacement effects, then replacement effects that would enter the battle, that would change whose control a permanent would enter the battlefield. Then you apply replacement effects that would make make something enter the battlefield as a copy of something else. Then lastly your regular replacement effects. So if there are others, just keep applying them until you get to the final event. Okay. So let's say if you have two or more replacement effects and it will try to affect one event. Let's say these two effects aren't from the same control. Okay. Let's say it's from your opponent and the affected player is you. Since you're the affected player, then you get to choose how those effects are replaced. Okay. So it's also possible that the other replacement effect won't happen anymore because you chose the other one and the other one doesn't apply anymore. And let's say what happens if there are two or more players that have to make a choice because they're all affected by one replacement effect. Then each player gets to modify their own version of the effect in ACNAP order, which basically means active player, non-active player. Forbrand, Dictate of the Gods, Gisela, plus Lightning Bolt. Yes, we have a similar example to that later, Pat. Yes, Vin, similar to Whip of Erebos and Obsidat. Yes, since you get to choose which replacement effect to apply because you're the one who is controlled. So the other could happen, the other would not. Okay. So before that, I have set some scenarios for you to discuss. But before we proceed to this, do you have any questions? If not, we can safely proceed to the. Okay, none for now. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, so we'll get to the examples now, to the scenarios. Here we go. Anyone can see the slide clearly? Are the cards readable? Okay, so I suppose silence means yes. So let's try to get you guys to answer stuff. Okay. So here's the scenario. First scenario. So Andy and Ned are in a game of magic, obviously. Andy controls Angrat's Marauders. Ned controls Center Cursor and Valkmira Protector Shield. Andy casts Pillar of Flame targeting Center Cursor. So here's the question. Does it live? Bonus if you can state how things happened. Let's see. Dino, are you there?
Yeah.
Uh,
Phil.
I think we can have the people open their mic if they want to answer on in voice. If not, they can just read. They can just type in their answer in the chat.
Sure.
Just force us not to get dead air.
Okay. Yeah. Let me check with KS. KS, can they just unmute the mic directly?
Yes, they can unmute. Whoever wants, you can just unmute your microphone and you can ask your questions.
Okay, so who's the brave one who wants to answer the first scenario? So one judge here, Benny, says that depends on Ned's decision. Again, bonus points if you can state how things happen. So AJ says no. Self-replacement comes first. So 4 damage minus Valkmira, so 3. Then exile since Litan, okay? Anyone else? Don't be shy if you want to open your mic. I think it's better for us to discuss this with voice rather than having to type it. Anyone, any more brave soul who want to answer? Sorry, no, it's fine, it's fine. So I suppose you don't want to explain it, or are you just fine with the with your answer? So any other? Okay, so Jovian says Ned choose which applies first. Patrick says Ned may opt to prevent 1 damage source, then apply to Marauders. Hence, 2 damage be applied. Okay. So any more? Any more different opinion? Joey says, Andy doesn't pay 1. No, let's just assume here that every cost can be paid, Joey. Good catch, though. So anyone with does have a different opinion than other people here? I can finally can I finally give the answer now? Okay. So the answer is actually those who answered both would actually apply here. So the scenario that someone says yes it lives, yes it does. So the affected player applies Valkmira's effect first, reducing Pillar of Flame's damage by 1. Then Marauders, doubling the damage to 2. So yes, Center Cursor lives. And some people said that it depends on how Ned applies it. So if it's done in reverse, the affected player applies, or let's say Ned mistakenly applies Marauder's effect first, doubling the damage to 4. Then Valkmira reduces it by 1. So it gets exiled. So just a little bit to go back here. AJ, there is no self-replacement effect to apply in the scenario, okay? Since there are no cards involved that has a self-replacement effect. Okay, so let's go to the next question, the next scenario. Just very, very simple. So Andy is busy playing solitaire with his newly built spirits deck and is trying to experiment on something. He casts Lingering Souls from his graveyard using flashback then decides to counter it with his remand. He is curious on what will happen. So what happens? Anyone could answer? Bonus points if you can explain it in detail. Lom says exile. Okay. Any other? It will return to owner hand. Benny says it will return to owner hand. Ian says lingering souls will be exiled. Patrick says exiled. Michael says exiled. So only one says it will return to owner's hand. Anyone who could explain it in detail, it would be great. So any other opinions? Don't be shy if you have a mic. Remand will attempt to put back on the card on the hand. Okay, Vince, go continue. Edmund says countered and exiled. Anyone else with a different opinion or want to explain it in detail? Or should we just wait for someone put the entire 702.34a there. So Vince continued. Lingering as an effacement effect within its cast from graveyard will be exiled after. Lee says not create 2/1/1 because countered and exiled the lingering souls. AJ says countered and exiled. Okay. Any other opinions before we reveal the answer? I suppose no. Okay, so I will reveal the answer now. And the answer is yes, it gets exiled. So let's try to explain it in detail. Remand has a self-replacement effect as we discussed. Okay, so first, remand's self-replacement effect would apply first, putting lingering souls to its owner's hand. But since lingering souls would lead the stack, flashback, which is also a self-replacement effect, dictates that lingering souls be put into exile instead of putting it anywhere else. So just so we're clear, it is best to explain it this way so people don't get confused. Both are self-replacement effects, so you both apply them. You apply them first before everything else. Okay? It's pretty much simple. Pretty simple scenario. So I have 3 more scenarios here before we go to the question and answer. So here's the third one. Why is it not a choice? Because Nathan, there are self-replacement effects. You cannot have the choice of applying them in order because as we stated in how we apply replacement effects is that self-replacement effects go first. And both are self-replacement effects, remand itself and the flashback ability itself. So after everything is applied, then if there are all other choices, then you get to apply whatever replacement type would actually try to happen. Okay? So is it clear with that? Yes, they're both replacement effects. They're both self-replacement effects, but you applied them first. Both applies in that same scenario. In the case of remand and lingering souls, you have something to counter first. So you try to put it into its owner's hand. But lingering souls will try to leave the stack. Then it gets exiled. It's in that precedence. Okay, so I think is it clear now? Yes, hand up, that's correct. Remands effect and flashbacks effect are applied on different events. You need two, there are two separate events. One is countering, one is leaving the stack. Yes, Benny, it is. So let's move on with the next scenario. Another basic one. Okay, so Andy controls center cursor and essence of the wild. He casts clone and resolves, choosing center cursor as the creature to copy. So what happens when what happens? Anyone can answer now. If you want to use the mic, you are free to do so. So Vince says clone is a copy of Essence of the Wild. Any other different opinion? This is not that hard, believe me. This is just a very basic example. Anyone who wants to try? If assuming essence of the no, if assuming essence of the wild is out, yes, Vince. Both essence of the wild and center cursor are already on the battlefield. So Mark says clone is a copy of essence. Lee Andy says clone copy center cursor because ETB asks. So question Lee Andy, does clone enters the battlefield as center cursor first or becomes essence of the wild, or does it enter directly as an essence of the wild? Before you can, you as affected player can choose. So we have two different opinions right here, right now. Joey says you choose because there are two effects to choose from. So who says here that clone will enter as a center cursor? You can put a emoticon raising your hand like this. If you say that clone will enter the battlefield as center cursor, you use this. If you think that clone will enter the battlefield as essence of the wild, use this. Oh, wait. It was sent as a direct message. Why is that? Anyway, everyone. Sorry. Okay, again. So if you say that clone will enter the battlefield as a centaur, use this. If you think clone will enter the battlefield as essence, use this. So Lee Andy says it will enter the battlefield as centaur. Okay. 3 people says it will enter the battlefield as essence. Don't try to guess. Try to apply the replacement effects as I discussed. So in majority, we're saying that clone will enter the battlefield as essence of the wild. So I suppose we could reveal the answer now. Okay, there are still people answering. Okay, so here's the answer. Here's the verdict. So if you apply clone's replacement effect first, The effect will set clones copyable values to that of center cursor. Then essence of the wild applies next. If you did apply essence of the wild first, that will set clones copyable values to that of essence of the wild. Then this will basically override clone's own ability. TLDR, clone enters the battlefield as essence of the wild no matter what happens. So learn something new today, right? This is basically a trick question. So it's fine if you got it wrong. At least you learned something today. So let's go on with the no Joe. Yes, you have a choice, Joey. But the problem here is if you apply clones replacement effect first, then yes, it will set the effect of clones copyable values to that of center cursor. But essence of the wild is also part replacement effect, so it will also apply itself. Yes, yes, Manuel, there is a choice, but it doesn't matter. Yes, it's correct. Again, this is a trick question. So let's go on with the next scenario. So, well, yes, it is easy as long as you apply it in correct in the order and you know what's going to happen. Going back to the flowchart, you should have read it. Okay, so here's the next scenario. So it is currently Andy's pre-combat main phase, and he casts Brainstorm. So let's assume the top 5 cards of Andy's deck are known. 2 of the top, which is Blightsteel Colossus, which is on the very top of the deck. Then Emrakul beneath it. Then let's just assume the rest are basic islands. So Andy also has Dakmor Salvage in the graveyard. Never mind how it got there despite Ned's Leyline of the Void being on the battlefield. Okay, so what happens when Brainstorm resolves? Bonus points if you can explain the entire scenario. What would happen? If you would like to use the mic now, please do. We have 3 minutes to tackle this scenario. Yes, Vince, you should. Go on. Don't be shy in answering. How about you, Joey? Try to answer it. You've been away. You've been so away for a while. So I'll just repeat the scenario again. Andy, during his pre-combat main phase, casts Brainstorm. The top 5 cards of Andy's deck are known, which is Blightsteel Colossus first, Emrakul second, then the rest are basic islands. Andy also has Dakmor Salvage in his graveyard, never mind how it got there in the first place. And Ned controls Leyline of the Void. What happens when Brainstorm resolves? So, any takers? I really encourage people to use the mic for this one. And someone did open up their mic. Are you up to it? Looks like no one is trying to figure out what's going to happen. Don't be shy. Come on. Yes, we know Joe is going to get exiled.
Hello, hello, testing.
I can hear you just
Hi.
fine.
Okay. Are we assuming that Andy is choosing to dredge the Darkmaw Salvage on the first card, second card, or the third card?
Yes, I forgot that.
Or not dredge at all?
I forgot that. Good catch. So I forgot that part. Andy is dredging on the first draw.
Oh, it's okay. So he's choosing to dredge on the first draw. And the five. Okay, so the first two cards will be Blightsteel and Emrakul. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so can I try now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so the brainstorm happens. He will choose to dredge. So dredge will mill Blightsteel and Emrakul. Emrakul does not get put into the graveyard because of Leyline, therefore it will not shuffle. Blightsteel does not touch the graveyard because it replaces the effect, so it will shuffle back into the deck after resolving brainstorm, after drawing the two cards.
So you're saying that Blightsteel Colossus gets shuffled after brainstorm resolves?
Yes.
Okay, so any other takers? Although
it doesn't go into the graveyard, so it doesn't get shuffled.
Yes, Lom. Can you repeat that, please?
I don't think Blightsteel Colossus goes to the graveyard, so it doesn't get shuffled.
Okay, so let's when brainstorm resolves and you dredge, both Blightsteel Colossus and Emrakul gets exiled off Leyline.
Yeah.
Okay, so any other takers? We still have time. Michael says Blightsteel Colossus would be shuffled back to Andy's library while Emrakul gets exiled. Okay. So, Michael, when does Blightsteel Colossus get shuffled? Yes, Jovian. Blightsteel is replacement. Emrakul is triggered. Yes. So just to repeat, Michael, when does Blightsteel Colossus get shuffled in this case? Looks like we're not getting any answers here. So is it safe to assume that we are ready to reveal the answer? So yeah, I'll just reveal the answer now since we already got 2, 3 people, 4 people already trying to answer it. Okay, so here's how it goes. Andy chooses to dredge, so he basically mills 2 cards, right? Then first, he can choose to shuffle Blightsteel Colossus immediately into his library or gets exiled. Then Emrakul gets exiled by Leyline of the Void, and its triggered ability never occurs because it's not going to the graveyard. Then Andy puts Darkmaw Salvage to his hand, then draws the remaining 2 cards from Brainstorm. So to answer who that guy was who answered the question, Blightsteel Colossus gets shuffled immediately, not after Brainstorm resolves. So in this case, Andy puts 2 cards from his hand on the top of his deck in any order, then Brainstorm gets exiled. So are we clear with that scenario? Since it's a replacement effect, you do it immediately because you're trying to replace the event. So you shuffle it. The draw from Brainstorm is not draw 3 immediately. It's draw 1, draw 1, draw 1. So you replace 1 draw with dredge 2 first. Then 2 cards get milled, 1 get replaced. Then you shuffle the Blightsteel Colossus immediately. Then you draw through. Clarification on choose to go back to library on gets exiled. Yes, Mark. No, it's not, Mark. It's not a self-replacement effect. To be for it self-replacement effect, it should be part of a resolving spell or ability. And in this case, Blightsteel Colossus isn't part of a resolving spell or ability. So I suppose we got that part. Wait, but since library gets shuffled, how does Emrakul gets exiled? You get two events here, Joey, that lets you mill two cards. But instead of mill two, exile two from the top of your library in from the graveyard to the exile immediately. So Emrakul doesn't get the chance to hit the graveyard this way because of Leyline. But since you control Blightsteel Colossus, you get to choose where it ends up. So I suppose that's yes, Nathan. Draw is at one at a time, but mills it all at once. Yes, that is correct. So I suppose, okay, Benny, do you shuffle if you choose to exile the Blightsteel? Yes, you do shuffle if you choose to exile. Sorry, do you shuffle if you choose to exile the Blightsteel? No, you don't. It's either you shuffle it into the deck or you exile it, since you control the replacement effects there. Or you are the affected player, and you choose what a replacement effect to apply. So are we clear with that, Benny? So Joey says you wait till you resolve the whole spell. No, Joey. You replace the event of it going to the exile with shuffle it instead. You don't need to wait for it. You just do what you had to do. So and each can choose which replacement would apply first, get exiled or shuffle back immediately. Yes. Before you proceed with the finishing other actions while the spell is resolving. This is different from triggered abilities, which waits when spells or abilities resolve, and there are triggers in the stack waiting to happen. So for replacement effects, they just happen immediately, so you don't need to wait. Okay. So I suppose we'll not try to discuss this last part since we don't have any more time. But if you have any questions, try to raise them now before Dino reminds us that it's over already. Do you have any questions for this seminar, guys? I suppose no. But in the case that you have questions, you can always go to this mini group of ours. It's called Ask the Judge. Although I'll be stepping down from my duties here, but the group is so awesome that you can basically post questions here anytime that you need clarifications. Even if you're a judge, don't be shy because we are all human. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank you guys for listening. It's been awesome for me to be able to present again, especially on an international audience. So yeah, again, if you have questions, just post here in this group. A lot of people will be definitely answer you immediately. And if you have um, concerns about where resources, I've got this what do you call this? Basically, the essence of the presentation. You can go through these links, especially the last one. This was taken directly from Judge Academy. I just have to snip some text out, but you are free to retake the entire module if you wish. This serves as a very, very good refresher. So again, thank you guys. I would hand over the floor to KS and Dino.